I'm gonna pass it to we are recording this so others can enjoy it after the fact. To pass it to Lisa, maybe just start a little bit about tell us about the impetus for the We Are Bound report.
Sure. First, let me say, hey, y'all. Stephanie, seen you. There are so many of you. I'm just sending hugs to you, and those of you who are meeting me for the first time, I'm sending you a hug too because that's just the way I am. I'll start before I jump into the impetus of the report. Is just give you a little insight of me. I am a daughter of the South. I am currently in the South right now. I am from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the eldest of seven. And my mom comes from a family of 12. So I come from community, like my family's community. I was a dancer and choreographer who found myself in law school, became a member of the bar. I got through there from the A-League program. So my commitment to dance and that dance party that we're gonna go see Adam in is for real. I love, love, love to dance. Music is therapy. I also love people. Like I love community. And so my relationships are often very rich. What else I wanted? So if you don't know me, if you know me, you know you can be like, wait, Lisa, wait, wait, wait. If you don't know me, I'm saying you can say, wait, Lisa, wait, wait, wait. What do you mean? What are you saying? Unpack that. Please like be in dialogue and conversation. Um, let's see. I think that's about it. I really want you to just know, ask me anything, bring it in whenever you want to bring it in. And I'm here to have a conversation. I put together a little bit of a presentation for you because there were a couple of things that came up that I thought was quite apropos for today's conversation. But other than that, we're going to talk. I will say the impetus of this report, which there's the digital copy, which everyone has, and then there are bound copies, which you could get from Amazon if you don't have. And so I have my bound copy, and one of my colleagues will drop the digital link, but I understand that you've already had access to and read it. But it came out of an inquiry from the Artist Relief Coalition partners to do an excavation of what happened in 2020 with Artist Relief. And so Artist Relief in 2020, Artist Relief did not exist January, February 2020. So let me name that. This did not exist. There was no plan for it to exist. There was no intention for these 7 coalition partners to come together to be directly responsive to the dire straits that were happening as a result of COVID on the artists and creative community that did not exist. And in 10 days, an idea through a conversation became what really was a movement. In 1 year, 9 months, because it didn't exist January, February until March, $21 million were raised at $5,000 grants to 3,916 artists and creatives. There were over 160,000 applications that flowed through a system that did not exist. It did not exist at the top of the year. A system that was both digital and human. There was a huge ecosystem that operated on the mission. And the mission was to get as seamlessly, as easily as possible, financial support to artists, period, full stop. And really looking throughout the United States at artists across a spectrum. And so the impetus of looking at that excavation and beginning to document, we were in August of 2021, when this particular conversation had started, to not lose what actually had happened. And we looked at just the first iteration of Artist Relief, because there was an Artist Relief Part 2 that rolled into 2021. So the report that is the We Are Bound report in its red bound versus this blue bound recommendation was inspired by a desire to tell that story. And because our mission is transformation towards just, equitable, thriving societies, and we don't take that lightly. It is not a code word. It is literally everything that we decide that we're going to do. We look at transformation through 5 filters: structural and systemic, environmental, economic, visibility, and leadership development. And we look at it on whether or not the work that we can do, whether it's our partnership, our analysis, our contribution, should have a generational impact. So those are filters that have been in place and been developed since 2009. This is not brand new. This was since 2009, being very intentional about being able to leverage the rooms that I had been in, and those rooms that would open those doors that was open to me primarily by Black women, Mickey Shepard, Maureen Knighton, and others who took me in as a young steward then, a younger steward, now 20 some years in, to this ecosystem of arts and culture on all levels. And so we take it very intentionally to see, well, what is the potential systemic impact that we can have? So the We Are Bound report that you've been spending some time in not only tells the story of what happened and take the lessons that came out of that for crisis preparedness, which is one part of the recommendations. We also look at, well, how do we name and begin to resolve the economic disparities? And so resolving economic disparities, that red piece of which the 4 Ps emerged, and we can talk about that, pay, protection, political positioning, and let's see, pay, protections, political positioning, and something else like I'm not remembering at the second. But those things emerge out of looking at the system and seeing, well, how, because COVID did not create the precarity that artists had been experiencing, it amplified it. And so let's not be distracted by that reality. I'll pause there. Lillian, did you want to ask me some more questions on it, or do you want me to share my presentation? Thank you, Indira. Love you, Indira.
Yeah, we can go right into the presentation, and then from there we'll take more questions.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me tell you one of the things that is in this presentation, this is like, don't do copyright infringement. So I'm naming it, it's straight bootleg copyright infringement for the recording. Do not do this. Do not follow this lead. But I wanted you to see this piece, and Amazon was not letting me just share it with you, even though I paid for a subscription. I thought I should be able to share it. It does not work. So I had to like do that old school 1980s, take a copy from my phone, put it up. So you're gonna see some real engineering happening in real time. I put together a presentation around We Are Bound, which will take us through talking about really the question of why we're here. And if you have not heard of AIR, I want to lift up Margaret Morton, who brought AIR to my attention when I was sharing with her some of the things that we are thinking about doing next. And let me know, I look fuzzy. So if it gets a little weird, do let me know. But there's some, look up AIR, it's new, it's out. That's why I couldn't download it. And I want to share a piece. When you're asking and thinking about why we're here, the way I see this, we're not here just to talk about We Are Bound, right? Like realistically, that's not why we're here. We are here for systems change. We are here to disrupt it. And what I loved about this piece, there are a couple of pieces I want to lift up for you in that. I love that she said, it's so obvious that I assumed from the term sheet that it was a clerical error, So when we're talking about the economic disparities and that artists are not receiving their share of the creative economics, we have to know like this is so obvious. And it's okay that it's going to feel like a disruption, because it is. That's not how it's done. How many of you heard that? That's not how it's done. We don't do it this way. We got to do it this way. We got to take it to the board. There has to be such clarity on your part. If you are the advocate and voice of artists and creatives and makers or entrepreneurs or whomever you're standing in the stead of when you're at that table, you have to be so clear that when you hear that's not how it's done, that it'll disrupt the industry, that you say, okay, that's the intention. I also love that she said, we think that it's a benefit to him, because you get that too. Well, they're going to get this check, they're going to get this payment, they're going to get this term, but they're not getting any residual to continue to leverage the creative assets of their imagination. And that's the long tail that gets lost. And that is what we're seeking to change. That's why we're here. We are here because the creative economy, that model right now, is insufficient for individual art makers. It's outdated, it's oppressive, it's antiquated, and it's insulting. So systems change requires one to be clear and honest about the roles they play in maintaining the system. And sometimes that's the hard part because you want to look outward and say what's all wrong externally. But first you got to start to see, where am I benefiting from this current system and what must I be willing to let go of to achieve a more just and equitable society? Conviction starts within. So a brief overview, really brief, because you all have went through this. There were two. The excavating the story that I mentioned earlier is represented on the left. And it was an incredible ecosystem of committed stewards and catalysts and artists and creators and funders and practitioners and administrators, you name it. It was an ecosystem that made something that did not exist at the top of the year distribute an unprecedented almost 4,000 grants in 9 months. On the right are the recommendations that flowed from that. And at the time when we were developing that, and I want to lift up Kelly Lane, who was a core partner in developing We Are Bound from the beginning, who is on this call, we realized that we couldn't just add the recommendations at the end of the report, that the excavation, the story, the poetics of it, the courage in it needed to be its own separate document. And then the recommendations had various layers because it too was part of an ecosystem. We Are Bound is a declaration. So Lilla Watson is the one who, from which We Are Bound is borrowed from and named from and gifted from. But We Are Bound for me is a declaration. It's a recognition that I am bound up with you. It's a recognition that my freedom hinges on your freedom. And it's also a mantra. A mantra is a meditation that you can say over and over again that becomes part of clarity, a slogan. And so We Are Bound for us is both a declaration, a mantra. It's what we excavated. And the 7 funders that were coalition partners were Academy of American Poets, Artadia, Creative Capital, Foundation for Contemporary Arts, MapFund, Young Arts, and United States Artists. And they came together, and again, they were buttressed by an ecosystem that bolstered the ability for them to award that 3,916 grants, the $5,000 in non-taxable grant relief. But our central questions for this wasn't just what happened, right? Because that, although an amazing and incredible story and really quite an experience hearing people recall and go back to very difficult spaces to tell that story, isn't Yancey Consulting's mission. Our mission is transformation towards just, equitable, thriving societies. So we needed to ask more questions. And so our central questions beyond the what happened is, how do you prepare for a crisis? What needs to change in the creative economy ecosystem so that more artists, creators, and makers can achieve sustainable financial security? And can we accelerate advancement towards this, what we named that needs to change, if we recognize and co-join artists and entrepreneurs' shared challenges and ambitions? And that last one was really looking at determining whether, how do we come together and stop the siloing? I believe that sector siloing is basically redlining. And what that does is it keeps and weakens the populations that could actually come together and build more power. And when we did that, we found what you already know, because there are tons of reports. The system needs to change. We need to mitigate the need for persistent economic relief with the creative class, and we need to do it from a systems perspective. And when I say systems perspective, I'm talking about naming the interlocking and interdependent entities, values, and intentions that is like the mortar holding the current status quo together. And so it's not just a one, it is who's involved, what is the relationship between who's involved, what are the underpinnings that keep those involved in place, and what is it that we need to change about how those relationships are enacted so we can have different results. The overall recommendations address crisis preparedness and resolving economic disparities. You have that in the recommendations, and the recommendations were intentionally written to focus on 4 core areas: philanthropy, artists, cultural institutions, and regulators. You have this in your book. I just brought this up to let you know that crisis preparedness, the reason why we developed the near to short term the longer term, the near to short term, the longer term, is because we didn't want people to get a book and feel like I don't know where to start, right? Like that was done with intention. And so we took great care to say, all right, once I read all of this, the general impetus is to be like, this is a lot of information. This is a lot. This is a lot. That's like, this is a lot. Because we believe that that a complex society and complex ecosystem that isn't necessarily complicated, which is what Viola said, another reason why I picked that particular clip, has to be so simple. And so it's a lot, it's a lot. And actually, it's not a lot. It's actually conviction. It's a decision. It's a decision on where you want to stand. It's a decision on where you're going to say yes. It's a decision on where you're going to hold as your non-negotiable. And so you'll see in the document, the near term, what could happen within a year, a longer term, what could happen between 18 to 3 years, and then at the end, a proposal in thinking about ecosystem work that looks at a 5-year rollout, of which there's a 3-year plan, and the first year activates around different parts of a community coming together to come up with strategies and what the pilot experimentations would look like. So these were the 4 Ps that you referenced. Similarly, we did the same, where the mindfulness, and this was addressing the resolving economic disparities, looking at the perception. Perception is a key piece. I think that perception is one of the greatest harms, because it creates language of where artists are even seen. What's the visibility, eligibility, and legibility of creators and makers? And so very often the exceptionalism trope keeps artists as exceptional and not part of the labor class, although they're actively a part of the labor class. And so there's language around how do we hold perceptions? How do we hold this idea that artists' role is to solely be the moral compass? And that is not true. We have to have shared responsibility around what that looks like, and we cannot allow that to be a consideration that continues to keep artists in mass, because of course there are some artists that are doing fine, but as a class, they are not receiving their share of the economic, of the economy that's being generated from their efforts. And their science and their engineering. I believe artists are heart surgeons, quite frankly. So we found artists are hampered in enhancing their financial positioning over time when they don't retain the rights to amass and leverage their creative assets. One of the things that you found in the book, in the recommendations, is that we intentionally focus on economics, but we also know that nothing hinges on a single thing. So there are other determinants that are at play. We acknowledge that there are other determinants that are at play, but our focus was looking through the layers of an economic lens. I think that one of the biggest things that I took away from the amazing work that happened from that coalition, an ecosystem of individuals who were a part of the Artist Relief in 2020, is that they modeled and exemplified what radical collaboration can do. It not only changes the game, it can actually change the system. And when I talk about radical collaboration, you have these pieces here. This is not for you to read because you have it in the recommendations, but I wanted to lift this up. Radical collaboration for us is this idea where we look at the broader ecology member mix. So whether you mix some regulators and creators, distributors and investors, environmentalists and consumers, fortifiers and policymakers, if you're ever at a table where everybody at that table is from the exact same industry or the exact same sector or the exact same neighborhood, you cannot be possibly coming up with the best ideas that's going to have durability. You just don't have enough richness of diversity. You don't have enough space where it to preempt groupthink. You don't have enough, I don't know, to the amens. You just don't have enough of it that doesn't allow for the needed penetration that's going to happen for a longer durable systems change. And so radical collaboration is what was modeled in Artist Relief. And I believe it's one of the biggest examples and gifts that came out of that partnership. These were examples that are in the recommendations that really was thinking about, like, if we wanted to address the interventions around political positioning and perception, or perception and pay, what could be a focus area, and what is a mixture of the diversity that would be at that table? And these are examples of that. So you want to get to where you feel compelled to make it happen and just do it. And so I'm going to wrap it up with this part right here.
But he did the revenue, the shoe, and all future Air Jordan shoes. The shoe is just a shoe. But he did it.
You are remembered for the rules you break. What I like about that clip, that last part. So what happened was, as you saw, Viola Davis, a mother, Black woman, basically saying, we're not taking your $250,000 a year plus your Mercedes. We will take that, but that's not it. That's not good enough. He will get a share, not all the shoes, but where his name is on, where you're making money, you eat, we eat. And it took Matt Damon's character was adamant about, like, I believe in this. I believe in him. I believe. So that kind of adamant, that perseverance, that no holds bar, I believe. When you say, I believe in artists, I believe in whatever you fill in that blank, the courage to go all the way is going to be necessary. And someone's going to be listening, because that whole time, the role that Ben Affleck was playing, he was like, what you talking about, son? What are you like? No, ain't nobody, no, no one player. We've never done that. Nike had never done it. Adidas was coming in. Like, it was all the things that was saying no. Everything was saying no. I don't know if you peeped at the beginning of that particular scene, on the backboard of where Ben Affleck's office was, it says stretch the possibilities. So in this, there's so much, when you start thinking about the role that filmmakers play, artists, creators, in creating mental models that help you shape how to think, what you perceive as possible, what you hold to be truth. All of that's artists and creators. That's engineering science happening right in this presentation through artists. When he went back up and had reached his edge, him being Matt Damon, was like, we didn't get it. Even though she said, you got it. You do this. What was being translated is like, we didn't get it, because I didn't believe it was even possible for us to do that. I didn't believe it. And it took someone who actually could make that difference say, you believe in it? Let's do it. I'll deal with the board. I'll deal with, you did your part. Go close the deal. I will deal with the board. Everything after that changed. Passive income that Air Jordan brings into Michael Jordan is $400 million a year. How many contracts actually ask artists to put their brilliance in open source? That but for whatever little fee they get for residency, or whatever little fee they get for that commission, that's it. What if we reimagine that? What if we say, yes, this, and because the contribution that you're bringing by doing your work, doing your art, creating innovative spaces, actually inures to the betterment of our society. And there should be some translation of legacy and assets that remains within that creator. We need a tidal wave of experimentation, came from one of the funders in Artist Relief. I love that statement and line. And what that means is be willing, ready, and eager, and open to new portals of possibilities. Stretch the possibilities. New portals require new trials and experimentation, period, full stop. And if you're experimenting, that means that things are not going to go right. That's what experimentation means. It means that it's not going to be perfect the first time. It means it doesn't fit within a 12-month frame. It means that you keep going after it, and you look at what you take and what you learn to build from there. There has to be a commitment to stay in it until it's done. And that's what I'm preaching. So what we're tackling next. Right now, Katie Dixon reached out to me last year and was like, I read these recommendations and I'm just, tell me what to do. Like, I want to do some work around this. And I was like, great, because when we finished the work, we're like, we did the work. Y'all tell us how does this fit within what your priorities are? Maybe you're working on something within your institution. You have to determine, because actually that conviction, that courage, that movement has to happen within. You have a bounty of ideas. You have a model that happened with those who did this work in 2020 through Artist Relief. Now you have to have conviction and decide what it is going to do. And that right there has to come from within. And so Katie came to me and I was like, well, all right, well, let's see. And I'm like, I'm always here to do the work, but I'm really only want to do work with people who are really ready to do the work. I don't want to do work with people who want to talk about the work. There's plenty of people talking about doing the work. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in theorizing anymore. I'm interested in experimenting and testing, doing some analysis and being very clear and strategic, but open, not rigid, and malleable to what's to come. So we're going to tackle contracts. We're going to look and see what if we did a field-wide engagement of a mix of artists and industry, because ecosystem is necessary, institutional legal counsel, to say which are the boilerplate language in contracts that are basic carryovers from for-profits that could be reimagined because your values are just and equity. Like if you believe in being just and equitable, then how does that translate into your contracts? And which contract language can be reimagined? And then who will be first adopters to push those new language out? And so we're thinking through a field-wide and cross-sectoral interagency review of contracts and re-review of that language to see which language can change and what the recommendations of that language should be that actually goes to the benefit of individual artists and creatives. So that's what we're doing next. That's what we're thinking about doing next. That's what we're proposing next. We'll see. There seems to be some interest in that particular next. But the reason why we pick contracts, because it could have systemic wide change. It hits pay, it hits protections. We can get to digital protections. It gets to asset creation. It gets to wealth building. It's a very concrete thing that is widespread that can completely change the field. So we're here because the creative economy model is insufficient, it's outdated, it's oppressive, and it's insulting. And we don't want to endow that to future generations. And I believe we actually can fix this in our generation.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, let's fix it. There's a lot of people working on this, creating new futures has been working on this through the pandemic. Glad to see that you're taking it up. I'm really excited to see where that goes so we can get these better contracts for our artists. People put some things in the chat. Go ahead and, we want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's in there. You can continue to populate the chat with your comments and questions, but now let's just take a time to have anybody share any thoughts, reactions, what was resonating with you from the report and what Lisa just said. This is the time to share. You can use the raise hand feature, or put it in the chat. We'll monitor the chat, or just come off mute and share. I have one question to start. Lisa, I know that the recommendations for the funders weren't necessarily in priority order, right? But if you had to say there's one thing, if funders are looking to make a change in the way that they approach this type of work, what is the first recommendation that you think they should really prioritize and tackle?
I don't believe that there's a one thing, so I want to say that. I believe that what we have to get away from the binary and believe that there's only one way so that we can stay true to what it is that is right for us in that moment. And the right for you in that moment will speak to where your capacity is, where your readiness is. There are a number of factors. So I want to start by offering that first. And I think in offering that, the first thing is starting there to say, what are we really, what conviction, what do we want to change in my life? What's my legacy? What do I want to make happen in my time? What do I want to be a part of? And that I isn't an I because I'm doing it by myself, because you recognize that I am one of we. And when you recognize that you are one of we, then that I allows for you to do your internal decision-making, because we have to start within, because it's going to get hard and it's going to get uncomfortable and it's going to get fatiguing and people are going to say, no, it's not possible. And I really do recommend looking at AIR. It was just so many points where my friend and I just kept stopping, and I was like, okay, this is what happened here. And this part did this, and this is speaking to this part of the system. Did you see that little drop in the back? Like the director really put some good nuggets in it, so I recommend it. But I would say first start with saying, what is it that you're committed to until it's done? Not committed to it because it's the priority agenda in the moment. But what's the thing that feels tangible enough that you can get committed to until it's done? And map a plan around that. Like, see where you are and where you believe you could go, and who do you need to build into your cabinet? Who needs to say yes? It's not evenly yoked, and it's never everybody, right? Like, there is a hierarchy. It exists. It's real. Recognize it. But there's a hierarchy of where you can identify where to expend your energies to get to the next ladder of where you're building to. So I would say start there. There's no one way, but make it tangible and make it real. And don't get frustrated. Expect people to not have as much conviction as you, right? Like, don't let that be a tactic to keep you from doing your work. Like, sometimes we get like, oh, I'm so over them. They wrote this on the website and they don't really mean it. And this is happening. And that goes on for like months and nothing is happening. Don't buy into that. Like, say no to that. Just say no to them and decide what it is that you want to do. Because I use language, I and the we and the YC use language, kitchen cabinet. I pay homage to kitchens because kitchens have not only nourished, but they have been places of movements. They've been the safe spaces. Conversations happen in kitchens, fights happen in kitchens, love making happens in kitchen, like all kinds of really core, passionate things happen in kitchen. And people gather around to feed and fuel themselves, to unpack key things. And so you can find and be attracted to people who are also equally ready. And when you step outside of a silo, de-silo, step outside of the silo, like all the way outside of it, you're gonna find some resonance. You're gonna find some others who are looking at the same core issue and the same core value from a different perspective. And it's gonna give you much more depth of ideas, not just the same old stuff that you hear. And not that the same old is wrong or isn't good. It's just not generative enough for full systems change. So I would say start there. I can respond to some of the stuff. I didn't, when you're doing Zoom and you're in the thing, you can't really see the chat. So I'm going to respond to some of the stuff in the chat. Indira, yes, that if it wasn't for this Black woman, that passive income piece. So one of the things that I love about Viola's character there, and his mama, who's still living in Chicago, by the way, who has the foundation, by the way, who created a whole new system of wealth and economics that has been actually flooding into our ecosystem, by the way. If she didn't say, and what's clear, like, I know my son, that right there, like, I know my son. You don't have to know. You don't have to believe. You can tell me all the stats about everybody else. I don't know them, but I know my son. And I know he has the capacity to do that. And if I don't step in now, because I have faith and belief in what he has the capacity to do, then we're going to miss this opportunity. And if what we take from that is that even with all the resistance, somebody could hear. It could be right at that moment where that thing where you were like, nope, I know this is true. And if this thing is true, because if it's not true, you ain't gonna make no money, you ain't gonna make no money anyway. You're gonna let them go. But if it is, we're gonna lose. Where can we hold that? Where do we hold that conviction around our work? So yes to that.
There's a question from Khadijah in the chat saying that this work is empowering for artists to understand and engage in, and I see it as part of our political education. With that in mind, what are the creative, strategic ways in which we are bound and the actionable recommendations are reaching practicing artists outside of the bound in digital copies?
Yeah, Khadijah, I think I believe that's part of the work that networks and organizations say, hey, I want to organize around this. Can we hold a conversation around this? I think part of what we did early on in once we were producing, because we didn't want to just, last thing we wanted was folks to be like, that was good. Of course it's good. Of course it's good. It's gonna be good. We do good work. But that is not the point. if we only walk away with saying that is good and it's quotable, we're missing the key thing. I'm like, tear it up, dog ear it, say it's not good. We want to try this part, but leave that part out, adapt it, resonate it, embody it. And I think, Khadijah, part of what I believe, why I lead with conviction, why I lead with like, find the thing, the essence of the thing that's most important to you, is that then you would say, I think we should organize artists around this, or ask artists, well, what's the thing that's specific to you? And that's one of the reasons why we didn't conflate just all the recommendations, just in general, like field, like specifically artists, do a crisis preparedness plan. Like, don't be left out, because crises will come, they do come, and it's coming again. And funders, fund them. And do your own crisis preparedness plan, so that when it comes time for the crisis, you're not questioning where inequities live. You already know you need to give more money here. You don't need to do analysis around that, because you already know where the gaps are. You are prepared for that moment. Lean and step into that moment. And I think that we just need a decision to just do it. Just do it, and then and allow what come out of those conversations and that planning and that experimentation, investing in the infrastructure around it, and see what emerges.
Thank you. I really appreciate that response and the clarity around that. And part of why I think I even asked that is just because I was thinking, okay, I need to be organizing with my group of artists around these specific actionable items, because creating an emergency or crisis preparedness plan is just a real life skill. And, I think a lot of the ways in which the recommendations are framed can be reverse engineered for artists when they're going into positions with institutions, with philanthropy, with museums. If they know what is being recommended into these spaces to support them, then they can go in with those questions at the very beginning and be demanding that as a part of compensation and, being seen within their work. And so, that's for me why I said it's a part of our political education. Because this is, contracts and all of that legal stuff, all of it, artists are really suffering, myself included, even though I work in this field as an artist and as an arts worker. That doesn't mean that I even have the skills to navigate these things for myself, or that I'm protected by the space that I have in this field, when my income can also be precarious, and, that secondary, all of that fits together. So I really appreciate this as, just a real actionable framework for people to kind of bring into their lives and say, okay, I can do this, 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 and this.
And I would also say to you, Khadijah, I'm always open for a conversation. Seriously, I mean, we do that all the time. You don't have to be a contract, because period. If you want to spend some time thinking through, happy to be in conversation about that. And the reason why we are leaning in on the contract piece, because it's not even just artists and makers where this is going to actually benefit. Like, there isn't enough resources as an individual for you to be able to pay for the legal manipulations and reimaginations and rethink. That's one. So we're like, let's take that cost. We can share that. Like, let's just pick which clauses are the ones, and the ones that are going to be critical, that could have longer term impact, got to do with ownership, got to do with compensation, got to do with reimbursements, got to do with the digital protections, got to do with recognizing where you're not carried in your social safety nets because you're operating structurally. If we even just focus on those, like who gets rights, which rights, and one of the things that we as YC would fight, sort of fight, Kelly we'd be like, yeah, we're gonna say no. And that's the other thing that we need to do. We need to build enough power so that artists can say no without having to carry the weight of what that no means by themselves. Individually carrying a no is not possible. It's not even a real dynamic. But collectively, and if we can, and I do believe we can. I do believe we can. Believe in solidarity. I believe in cooperative practice, and I believe in organizing. And I think that part of the strategy of activating an industry-wide and bringing those directors and the presidents of these foundations and the presidents of these institutions and saying, okay, this is what your people, your council are saying, this is feasible. If you believe in this, this is the translation of that. Will you say, this is how we're going to change our contracts? The foundations and universities that we work with on our end basically said to us, it's like, honestly, we just never looked at it. We didn't know. We didn't know. I mean, you're right. This isn't fair. Why, how can I say I own your intellectual property of your methodology? I'm like, you don't own our methodology. We've been building that. I've been building that for over a generation. You get licensed to it. You get licensed to it for the outcome of the work we're doing, but you don't take the whole thing. And several of them had never even really looked at those contracts. They didn't really, and certainly didn't play out what that means in terms of long-term implications, and forcing those individuals, entrepreneurs, independent, small businesses like ours to have to rethink and start over from scratch every single time because someone want to say that they got a right to your brain. Oh, no more to that. Like, no. Mm-mm. And then when you call them to task, they're like, okay, you're right. So then let's figure out the language. Let's figure out the language together.
I see Clarissa has a hand up.
Yes, I feel like Lisa just responded to what I was going to ask about. First, I want to name, hi y'all, Clarissa, she, her pronouns, in Atlanta, Muskogee Creek Plans.
Yes.
Director of Strategic Partnerships at Alternate Routes. So excited by being able to just read through this work. We also held some emergency relief work, which was modeled after what was happening with the artist relief. Because that was up, we were able to put together a little something and support artists, organizers throughout the South. So super grateful to be able to just like dig into the findings and recommendations. So thank you so much for this work. What I was curious about just around like contracts and just understanding more about how you build in, what does equitable language around accountability look like in these contracts? And I know you're in the beginning stages of beginning to formulate that, but I'm curious, this is like a space that we're also looking at how we redo our contracts and starting to engage in those conversations and as we are building partnerships with our members. And so this thing of accountability and how we talk about it and approach it in equitable ways and in partnership with our member artists and organizers is also coming up for us right now. So yeah, I was just curious. I hear, I mean, we don't talk about owning folks' work, right, in our stuff, but I recognize that is a real thing in some other institutions. But yeah, I wanted to see if there's, beginnings of that language that you could also begin to share as well.
Yeah, well, so first of all, nice to meet you and see you. Roots is family.
Yeah, you came and did our facilitation.
I know. I'm like, Roots is family. So yes, yeah. Roots. And then Stephanie, I see your question too in this. We literally just finished writing the proposal because I needed to think about what this next thing looks like. And there are a number of networks and organizations, Roots being one, NILAC being other, that I want to, that's named, that's like, if we do this, we need to reach out and see in what ways we can be engaged together. So I want to say that. And the language hasn't, so yes, the language hasn't emerged yet because it's going to come out, it's going to come from the ground up. It's going to come from the ground up. The questions and the provocations are going to be, what do we mean when we say just? And what do you mean when you say equitable? And how does that translate into these areas? And what are the risks that we really are talking about? Like, what's the fear? Are we afraid that, let's name what we're afraid of so that we can begin to unpack and determine how to find consensus. That's going to be in the process. So there's nothing for me to offer just yet, with the exception of an intention and deliberate act and follow through for that. And naming for anyone who wants to be a part of what that looks like, just let me know. We're literally starting, but I can guarantee you they're the larger networks, the Artist Relief, I see you, the Artist Relief Coalition members. And then we want to do within that advisory group, we're imagining pushing out a broader survey once we have a core artist group of advisors. I really working and mining what that, and then we're going to have industry. Industry is going to include commercial too, right? Like, I think we, again, stop the siloing because it's fake lines. It's fake lines. They're not real. We're constructing them as if they are absolute, and they are not. And the implications are severe, and they're generational. And so until we ask the question of whether that's something that was constructed and needs to be deconstructed, it ain't real. So more to come on that. And I see Stephanie and I see others, if you're interested, definitely. But we are doing it for it to then push out across sectors. So there will be, the output isn't to create another report. Like, so over, as many reports as I do, I'm over reports. It really is about what is the adoption. Like, if we're not looking at ways in which we can think about adoption from the beginning, then we need to keep thinking. Yes.
Yes, we're coming up on time. Just wanted to make space. If there's one more thought, reaction, question that anybody has to share, this is the time to do it quickly. Yes,
Yeah.
contract subcommittee, great idea. Thank you, Lauren. Partner with Yanti on that.
I'll keep
All
you
right.
all posted on it too, once it starts and what's shaping out, like in its full transparency, because it's gonna take the week. I mean, this is really rework, and it's gonna take the week, but imagine, we do this work, we get because I believe we're gonna get adoption, right? We get some institutions to adopt it, and then they also say, for those who, particularly those who are grantees, to say, reconsider your contracts. Here's some language that exists. Here's the implication on artists, reconsider that if these are your values. In 5 years, and do you know the contracts that starts changing? And then we can partner with, well, who's doing the work around asset building for these artists, right? Like, so then we can move into that, and how are we thinking about what asset management looks like? And not just artists. I hear you, Khadijah, you like, me too. I'm like, as a small business, I'm like, me too, right? So how do we think about it in that anyone who's building and creating without the weight and of a system that was not designed for you to thrive, that's who it's for. Fill in the blanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been really a great hour. Really appreciate you coming to spend this time with us and share with us. And we've appreciated learning from your offerings and your insights these past several months. And it was really great to connect with you. Appreciate you so much. You know, Sherilyn's lost her voice, so I'm gonna put in a plug for people, reminding people to register for the conference. They can start doing that online, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys at our next meeting.
And everyone, I'm just gonna drop my email if you wanna follow with me. It's just Lisa, Lisa, at Yancey Consulting. Yancey is YANCEY consulting.com. And you can hit me, or Kelly, KELLI, not Y, and Yolita, JOLITA. All of that's at yanceyconsulting.com. We're always happy to be in partnership. Okay. Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you so much, Lisa. Bye.
Bye.
Regretfully they tell us, but firmly they compel us to say goodbye.
Bye.